Hello, welcome. I'm Dr. Zachariah Renfro, and today I'm going to tell you a little bit about the behind the scenes making of Faces of Recovery, Overcoming Addiction. Going to go through the creative process and going to talk about some of the reasons for making the book. I hope that this talk is educational and informative. By the end of it, hopefully you will be better prepared for any creative projects that you want to do, and you'll understand some of the things that I did when I was making this project. So now we've had a little bit of camera change. I'm going to talk about who am I? What do I do? I'm a philosopher by trade, semi professional photographer. Why did I make this book, right? So there's a couple reasons. So, like all great ideas, this one started years ago, probably back in 2017, 2018. I'd read an article and I tried to find it, but I couldn't find the exact same one. I was a student at Holy Apostles College and Seminary doing my master's degree in philosophy, and I'd read an article about the decline of Christian art. And I thought to myself, you know, um, wouldn't it be nice if someday I had the skills and the knowledge to make a piece of Christian art, right? And it just kind of stewed in the back of my mind, and I carried on with the rest of my life, right? Well, years go by, and over this time, I'm practicing photography more. I've, done like a wedding shoot, done some weddings. I've done some like family pictures and all that, right? Like I'm developing strong skill set as time goes on. I'm also finishing a doctorate degree. And, during this time, I've worked a ton of jobs. I was a licensed financial advisor, a mailman, worked at a bunch of stores. I taught at a high school. I worked in military intelligence. And, not to mention before all that, I was in the military, right? And I just did a whole bunch of different things. Well, at some point, I realized, like, I now have the skills to do this thing I wanted to do all those years ago. At the time, I was working as a mailman, but prior to that, I'd managed a drug rehab clinic. I was over a medical doctor, a counselor, and a small team of peer support specialists, and we had both inpatient and outpatient. And I'd gotten really touched by a lot of these addiction recovery stories. They'd really kind of changed my view. Because prior to that, I'd lost a cousin to addiction. Um, she ended up leaving behind three kids, and it was just a mess, right? Like, all because of a needle, all because of the drugs, right? And you know, to say at the time that my views were kind of what many people think about when they think about addiction, it is, a bit of an understatement, right? I thought it was a failure of the will. I thought it was a just a desire to keep wanting to do bad. I didn't really understand these powerful, powerful hold that these addictive chemicals have, right? I didn't understand that, if you sit down and you take meth in the morning, that by the afternoon you're not the same person, right? Like the moment those drugs hit your veins, it changes the chemistry of your brain, and the person you were before dies. You'll never be that person again. For the rest of your life, you're going to be someone else. And I didn't understand that. And it took working at an addiction recovery place for me to really appreciate that, right? And when I did that, it really opened my eyes. And it's one of those things where I wish that every person could get that kind of experience, because I just had no idea. And then I started hearing about all these stories of faith in recovery, about how people try time and time again to try and get sober and get clean, and nothing was working, and they were struggling, and every time they get their life put back together it'd fall back apart. And how for some of them, they just had this awakening, this come to Jesus moment where it all kind of clicked, where the faith was the missing piece, where they had this miraculous recovery. And I'm not saying that's the story of every person who's been through addiction, but if you ask enough people who've been through addiction, you will find it is more common than what you would expect, right? So, with all that being said, you know, I'm working as a mailman and I'm just getting this like tug on the inside, like, I need to make this project. I need to tell these recovery stories because if I don't, they might not get told, right? These stories might not get out there the way that they should. So I quit my job as a mailman. When I started this project, I did not have a job. I was literally just trying to do this full time, putting everything into my art, trying to make something happen, right? And I did get lucky. I ended up getting a part time professor job, which allowed me to be able to focus on this full time. But that's how important it was to me, right? I'm the sole breadwinner in my house, and I left behind a stable government job so that I could work on this art project. And I don't regret it at all. It's one of those things I'd do it again, I'd do it 1,000 times, right? Because there are some things that are more important, right? And that leads me to my first lesson for this book and for anyone. If there's something you're trying to do, whether it's a piece of art or whatever, you have to evaluate what's most important. And if what you're trying to do is the most important thing, then you have to, in many cases, try and move heaven and earth to make it work. You might have to, do some things that other people are going to look at you and they're going to think, wow, they are crazy doing that. Who does that, right? So that's the first lesson with this book, and that's who I am. Now we talk about some of the people featured in the book, and I want to give special thanks to all of them. You can see their names here, as well as, portraits of them. And I want to say that without them, this book would not have happened. It could never have occurred because this book is their stories, right? It is their lives. It is their recovery. It is their journey with God. It is all them. And, you know, I am in many ways just the person helping bring the story to life, but it is their story. So I want to give special thanks to each and every one of them. Some other people I want to give special thanks to: my wife, my daughter, who both acted as my photography assistants, Jana Raid, who did the beautiful cover design for the book, right? And I'll talk more about that later, but special thanks to her. Hope City Church, which let me use their facilities for doing photography, because I don't have a home studio, right? So they let me use their space, and I really appreciate that. So I wanted to give special thanks to all the people featured in this book because their stories are what's important. The book, it's good, you know, but it's not a book about me. And it's not a book about my life. It is a book about these individuals here, their recovery journey, and how it provides hope and a path forward for other people. There's someone out there who is in addiction or is in the early stages of recovery, and they're not sure if they want to keep going on. They're not sure if they want to try and get clean. They're not sure if they want to stay clean. And the stories of these individuals, one of these stories will help them, right? That there's, whether they read it from the book or whether they hear it from an interview with them or meet them in person at a recovery center, one of these people's stories will help them. And I think that's one of the things that in our modern age, we've really forgotten about. We've really forgotten how important it is to have stories and good examples. And it's one of those things where, in many ways, our society is worse for it because we're no longer looking to other people to try and learn from their wisdom, try and learn from their mistakes, trying to learn from their example. In many cases, we're looking to movies, we're looking to um, influencers, we're looking to things like Chat GPT, and those things, they'll all lead you down the wrong path. They're not going to be able to push you in the way that a story from a real person will. So again, I want to give special thanks to the folks featured in this book because again, without them, it could not have happened. It would not have happened. So thank you very much. What are some of the things I'm going to talk about during this discussion lecture behind the scenes thing? I'm going to talk about, what is art. I'm going to talk about the concept art process. I'm going to talk about some of the planning steps. Um, and I'm really just going to try and get into detail to all these things in case you ever want to do a project similar to this, whether it's a photo book or a collection of written stories, or whether it is a documentary, um, or even some of these ideas can apply to any type of big project, right? So just kind of going through this, I think will be very beneficial to you if you are wanting to do a project at some point in the future, right? Or if you're not wanting to do a project, if you're just wanting to kind of learn what went into it, like maybe you bought the book or you're thinking about buying the book and you want to know what went into it, I think this will be pretty enlightening too. Because, as a consumer, you get this book, this finished product, but, you know, you may not really know what went on behind the scenes. So it's kind of a neat peek behind the curtain, right? So the first thing is, what is art? And, before we can really even talk about like a photo book or, like a book of stories or anything like that, you got to figure out, well, what are you trying to do? Well, what is art? I read this definition years ago and I really like it. Art is a process of communicating through time using a medium of some sort. So, you know, the stories written about in this book, they all occurred in the past, right? And the goal is to take these things that happened in the past, put them in a medium that someone can really enjoy and appreciate and communicate to them in the future, right? Someone will pick this up and it almost as if by magic be transported into the lives of these individuals, right? To feel what they felt, to see what they saw, to understand in their own heart, right? And that's what art is. And it's one of those things, that's what bothers me about a lot of this like chat GPT stuff or people using AI to do stuff. They're not making art. They're making a product, right? That they want the kudos and congratulations that come along with creating something, but they don't actually have something inside of them they want to create. They just want to be acknowledged. So what they're making is a product, right? And what's a product? Well, like a commercial. A commercial is a product. It's a commodity, right? It's not something that, decades down the line, people will look back on and be like, oh, I understand that. I felt that, right? No, it is something disposable. It is an item, right? Like, let me give an example with my own work. I wrote the simple role playing game. It's a tabletop RPG book. It's a game. It's a product. Shamelessly, it is a product. I didn't use AI for it, right? But it is. I I would hesitate to call it art because it's not. It was designed from the ground up to be something that people bought and enjoyed as a pastime, not as something that communicates to their soul, right? So, with all that being said, if you have something you want to make, you need to look inside of yourself and see what it is that you want to tell other people. And then once you have that idea, you need to work on actually having the skills that you need to do that, right? That might mean you need to take classes in writing or take classes in art or study, right? Throughout this entire process, and I forgot to list this on the slide, but from the before I started making the book until I finished the book. I was watching lectures or videos, reading articles. I've got a whole library shelf full of books, right, to really make sure that I was putting out the best thing I could, right? Because once you have this idea in your soul of what it is you want to communicate, you have to make sure that you actually have the skills to back it up, right? Which leads us to our next part, which is the concept art phase. So before I started reaching out, before I started contacting people, I had this idea, right? I'd read in the Anonymous book the talk about alcoholism, right? And in many ways, the description of the bottle of alcoholism is not as a thing that you can put down. It's almost like a demonic force, right? Like something that grabs hold of you and changes you and forces you to suffer. And, I thought, well, that that seems like something interesting. And I had this idea for these arms, coming out of nowhere, or these ghostly visages grabbing people. And I needed to make sure I actually had the skills to make it happen. So I did a test shoot. That's my daughter there. She's got a sheet over her in front of a black background. And this was my test photo. And I put it up. And, people thought it was just really strange. No one liked it. Everyone seemed to hate this picture. But they didn't know, right? They didn't know that this was part of a grander plan. This was a proof of concept, right? And again, we go into more with concepts, right? So I started coming up with these ideas and drawing them out, and you can see I've got a scan in there of this idea, and you can see from my drawing it is not. I'm not some expert at drawing, but I had this vision in my mind of what I wanted, and you know sketching that out in the concept phase and doing test shoots allowed me to bring that vision to life. And we see here, and you'll notice some of these pictures slightly changed, right? So in this picture at the top with Chance Sweet and the demon, originally it was going to be three demons, right? But at the day of the shoot, we only had one person who could do the demon, and that was my wife, right? Like all these pictures with like the demonic arms, that's actually my wife in a sheet. She's playing the demon, right? Or the picture of Chance with the cross, you see originally it was just hands tied up. What we did is we ended up changing that, and we made two separate ones, one with him holding needles while hands are chained up, and then one with him breaking the chains, right? And then again had some changes, right? So originally these two pictures were meant for Shea Coffee, but after some discussion, we felt that it would be more appropriate for his pictures to be something else. And these pictures were with Stephanie Kramer, right? So again, I create the concept, but then as I get into the process, I change it as need be, right? Like if I see that there is a need to adjust, then I adjust it, right? Again, you can see there were changes here. So not so much with the picture of Sean at the top, but with the picture of Trey at the bottom. Originally, this was going to be Andy Vanover. But when it got to shoot today, we just didn't have time, right? We had a lot going on. So this ended up being a picture for Trey, and we ended up changing the theme a little bit. Instead of choosing between drugs and the Bible, it was just reaching out for the Bible, right? Then others come out exactly as planned. So this picture of Trey with the candles and the pentagram, I mean, that actually came out how we planned. Same with the picture of Shay praying, exactly as planned, right? I started making some of these concept art drawings before I ever talked to the people, right? That was the very first thing I did, was make some concept art. Then after I did interviews with the folks in the book, then I started drawing more specific concept art. So I have a bunch more concept art that was just never used, right? It never made it into the book just because, either location restraints or time restraints or, some other kind of issue that stopped us from being able to do that. You know, if I ever got the chance, I'd love to do like a second book or another one to bring some of these additional concepts to life. But, as it stands, this is where I was right now. Which leads us to the next section, which is that you got to make a list of things, right? And this is going to sound, I had all this talk, this hoity-toity, fancy pants art talk. Well, that's fine if you're just like doing a sketch, but like when it comes to actually like making a big project, you got to make a list. You need tons of lists. So I've got just two example lists, and what these lists say doesn't really matter. But I just want you as the viewer to know that at every stage of this process, I was making lists. I had probably from beginning to end 15, 20 lists, right? The list on the right is the list of things I needed to do for the photo book. The list on the left is the list of things I needed to buy at the beginning before I even started taking any pictures of just supplies, right? So, and I made many more lists. And if you notice the list on the right, if you look closely in the background, you can see uh, some sketches. It is actually on the back side of one of my concept art sheets. So if your project is like mine, where it has people in it, then the next thing you'll want to do is put together some flyers or, whatever to try and get people interested, right? So that's what I did. I made these up in PowerPoint and I reached out to a couple of people I knew where I'd set up a photo booth at a recovery rally. And I asked them, hey, can I put you on a flyer to try and get people for this book, right? So, we see on the left side just a really basic kind of flyer outlining the theme, right? And we see on the right side a creative brief. If you are someone who's watches shows like Project Runway, then you're familiar with what the idea of a creative brief is, right? Like it has a goal and a message and kind of talks about what it is that you're trying to do with the project, right? So, and that is very important if your project has other people. If it doesn't, then, this step might not be necessary. But I will say, even if your project is just you're working on like a sculpture or something, a creative brief, just the process of doing it, is actually pretty helpful, right? It helps you get your thoughts in order and helps you like understand what you're trying to do. Because sometimes when you're in the process of creating things, it might come and go. You might have trouble remembering like why am I doing this, right? So uh, having a flyer, having a creative brief is pretty helpful. Then once you've put up your creative brief, once you've got things going, you need to have some interviews. So for myself, I used kind of a two-step process. First was an unrecorded interview. These are screenshots taken, from my computer. But, it was an unrecorded interview. I took notes and just kind of like asked them about their lives, just trying to get everyone comfortable and get to know each other. Then the next step is we created some videos, video interviews for the folks that, were able to do video interviews. And that's where they sat down, they told their story, they shared, their life with people. And the video interviews were honestly one of the most helpful things. And I wish that I had more time that I could have done more of them because out of the 8 people featured, I only did 5 interviews. Um, so 3 people ended up not getting interviewed at and posted up videos on YouTube, and I wish that wish I would have been able to make that happen because it was helpful to me. Like as it went on, I could go back and watch these videos again and really think about their lives and, create new concept art or, plan new shoots or whatever, right? The next step is, the photo shoot slash editing process. And, there's two parts to like the photo shoots. First, you actually have to plan and take the pictures. Second, you have to arrange your photo shoots in a way that they're telling a story, right? If you're doing a photography work, for example, you need to be telling a story. People should be able to look at the pictures and know what it's saying, right? So we see here we've got some kind of before and afters images, before what it looked like and then after all the editing. And I want to hit on that storytelling aspect, right? So here's a PDF version of the book, and you'll notice in the book I actually have like a narrative section, right? Went through a long process of edits and revisions, right? So a lot of people who don't know a ton about writing, they they see commercials for like Grammarly and ChatGPT and think that's all they need to do. Well, no. There's two parts to writing. First, you sit down and you pour out your soul on the page and you get it all out there. And then, second, with the help of a human editor, a human reviewer, you read through it to make sure it's coming through clear and it's saying the things you want to say. I've got 8 narrative sections and a preface in this book, and I've rewritten each of them probably 15 times because it's an iterative process, right? If you went to college, then you might be lured into this false idea of thinking that writing is just one and done, but it's not. And college and high school do not prepare people to do real writing. Real writing gets done in editing as you keep going through and reiterating and changing and reiterating, and you set it down for a week and you come back a week later and you read it again and you change it, and that's what real writing is. It is not a one and done process, right? So with that being said, I'm just going to give you all a quick brief example of photographic storytelling, right? So this is Shay's story. If you've seen his video or if you know him personally, or if you pause the video and read the written part, then you know what happens. But if you haven't done those things, I challenge you, as we go through these pictures, just kind of look at the pictures and kind of guess what his story might be, right? So look at the pictures and kind of guess what his story is. You're wanting to tell a story, right? So we start out, this kind of demonic force has a hold of him. You see it cast kind of a dark shadow over his whole life, his military service, causes him pain and anguish. He starts turning to faith. Then he's able to break the bonds of addiction. And then, he's looking forward to a new future, right? Like, that's what your goal should be if you are doing a visual medium, if you're doing a documentary, if you're doing photography, if you're doing a painting, is that you are telling the story without words. If you're going through your process and the story isn't described without words, then you need to kind of work through it. You need to add more or take some away to really make sure that the story that you're trying to tell is being told, right? And this all leads back into that rough draft planning revision process, right? So here at the top, you see what the original cover looked like. And this was what I made. I made this cover using Adobe Photoshop and using Adobe Lightroom. And you can see that it's not nearly as good as the final product, right? You see at the bottom two pictures. That's made by Jana Raid, the graphic designer. She did an incredible job. She took my idea, what I wanted to do, and using her additional skills, she really brought it to life, made it much more impactful than what it was. Because I'm not saying that the cover I made was bad, but it definitely wasn't good, right? And that's another thing. If you're doing a big project, you have to know what your limits are. You have to know what things are you good at, what things are you not good at, where can you do it yourself, and where do you need to ask for help, right? Then on the inside you see the layout, and if you remember from when I was showing you all the PDF of the book, it looks a bit different, right? Again, we're looking at Shay, um, different color scheme. And this was, again, one of those iterative things, right? Working with Jana Raid, me and her had a lot of discussions about, the order of the pictures. And, maybe this one should be black and white, this one should be color, right? And we worked through that process together, this creative process, right? So, again, with any type of big project, don't think that it's just wham bam, thank you ma'am, one and done. No, it's iterative. You're working through it, you're planning through it, you're making changes. Because again, your goal is to communicate that message through time, right? You need to take these things that happened in the past, you need to take these things that are in your soul, and you need to put them in the hands of another person. And that's hard to do. Anyone that thinks communicating is easy hasn't done very much communicating, right? And to try and communicate through a medium such as a book or a picture or a painting, that's even harder, right? Which makes the process more difficult. Rough drafts, revisions, I rewrote the book probably 12 times. I changed the pictures around more times than I can count, right? It was an iterative process. Which leads us to the next part, right? So you've created this project, you've worked through it, you've given your heart and mind and soul to it. The next step is trying to sell it. And this is where it gets hard, right? If you are a very creative person, if you are a person that has these things on the inside that you want to get out and you want to share with people, you will not do good at the sales part, right? And this is one of the things where you will have to get help from other people. You will have to get someone who understands marketing and sales better than you, right? Think of the most basic, normal person you know. They're probably better at selling things and connecting with people on social media and stuff than you are. And I'm not saying everyone's like this, but that's kind of the side effect of being a really creative person, right? Like if you're a very creative person and you have a lot of things that you think about that are outside of the norm, whatever that means, then it will be hard for you to connect with people. And what is marketing? What is sales? It is the process of connecting with someone, telling them that you have something valuable for them and you would like to share it with them, right? So that is something that if you're working on a large project, you will need help with. And this is one of the things that I guess I should have done earlier. You need to start that process early on, probably before you're even finished. Start reaching out to people, trying to get things ready, right? So you see here, my book has no reviews. And I'll talk about this in the lessons learned, but in this modern age, you have to get early reviewers. If your book has no reviews, if your product has no reviews, no one, mark my words, no one will buy it. You've got to get reviewers. So, it's one of those things. Again, you know, if you're watching this and this is something you found interesting, please, I encourage you. If you buy the book, please leave it a review. It will help, right? I do think this is something that will really help people. But if the marketing isn't there, if the sales aren't there, if the reviews aren't there, then, it won't do any good, right? Which leads us into the lessons learned. Some of these are specific to photography, but some of these are general to any large project. So I should have cropped all my pictures to the same size, right? I was treating every individual image as if it were like a painting, and I was cropping it in such a way that it, you know, like if I was going to make it a painting, that's the size it would have been to tell the story that I was trying to tell, but I really should have cropped them all to the same size. Now, in the book, I got around this by just doing a lot of full page spreads, right? Let me flip to one and show you what I'm talking about. I did a lot of full page spreads, but that is one of those things because I'd never made a photo book before, uh, a photo art book specifically. I've done things like, family trips on Shutterfly or something, but like a photo art book, that was something I didn't really quite think about. Next thing is more behind the scenes stuff. This is one I actually wanted to do, but just due to the logistics of the project, it was hard, right? Because I was having to borrow space, which meant I had to set up and take down all my stuff every time. So instead of being able to focus on like, hey, let's have uh, my wife with the second camera just kind of capturing some behind the scenes stuff, um, we were busy setting up and taking stuff down and moving stuff around. If I had my own home studio, that would have been a lot easier, but that's just life. Something else that could have helped is if I extended my timeline. Now, I'm going to say this for those of you doing a project. This is good and bad. If you're someone like me who's good at planning and well disciplined, you can extend your timeline and it's not going to cause a lot of issue. But if you are not like me, then you want to keep a pretty rigorous and short timeline, at least for your first project, right? Now, for me, this was my first photo book, but it wasn't like my first project, right? I made other books that they were just nonfiction books, game books or philosophy books, right? So, like, for me, that wasn't a problem. But if it's your first project, you want to keep a tight deadline. And why do you want to do that? One, you don't want your project to get too big. You want your project to be at a manageable size for whatever your skill and budget allows. Two, if you're doing your first project of some sort, you don't have a lot of like reputation or stuff to go on. So you need to be able to show people like, hey, I can do this and get it done, right? Again, I've got a doctorate degree. I've written books before, so for me that wasn't a concern. But if this is, if you're doing your first project, well, that's something you got to keep in mind. I should have also planned my shoots a bit more rigorously. Again, this was a side effect of having to borrow space. I should have had a more scheduled layout on shoot day, right? I should have set up early reviewers. I should have started marketing earlier. And, as far as that marketing, I should have honestly probably tried to hire someone who does marketing, right? Because, like I said, if you're someone who's really creative, you will have a really, really hard time connecting with the average buyer because they don't think like you think. If they did think like you think, they would probably be, making their own kinds of projects, right? So with all that being said, so that's my advice. The marketing, the reviewers, if you take nothing else away from this, that's something you need to start doing and you need to try and get a lot of it, right? If you've enjoyed this video, if you feel like you got something out of this video, I encourage you, take a look at the book. I've got it in paperback, I've got it in hardcover, both available on Amazon. Pick it up, read it, leave it a review. It would really help. If you think that something of this line could be helpful to someone please share it. Give the video a like or leave a comment, just anything you can. I really am trying to get the word out there. I'm trying to get as many people connected with this as I can, and I can't do it on my own. So if you're able to, if you're interested in helping out in any way at all, I would appreciate it. So that's all I've got. Thank you so much for your time. I hope this video was informative and educational, and I hope that it, kind of showed you the behind the scenes of this project. And I hope you have a wonderful day. Thank you.